Something about today feels heavy, but not in a burdensome way. It's the kind of weight that comes just before a breakthrough, a quiet pressure that builds inside, pressing on old patterns, stirring hidden emotions, and making it harder than usual to ignore what you've outgrown. If you've been feeling unusually emotional, unsettled, or like something inside you is rising to the surface without warning, you're not alone. Today, something in the spiritual atmosphere is shifting, and it's meant to wake something up in you. Astrologically, we're standing in a rare window. Uranus, the planet of disruption and divine surprise, is in perfect harmony with Neptune, the ruler of higher vision dreams and spiritual clarity. This is not a common pairing. The last time we saw something like this was decades ago, and every time it happens, it signals a deep turning in collective awareness. But before that, grace lands the moon squares, both Pluto and Venus, pulling up emotional tension, spiritual resistance, and relational friction. That's why so many people today might feel like they're being pulled in two directions. One part of them wants to surrender and transform, while another part is clinging tightly to routine comfort or control. But here's the truth. Days like this are not here to hurt you. They're here to reveal you. In spiritual tradition, today is also the feast of Saint Augustine, a man who ran from truth for most of his life until he could no longer deny the pressure in his own soul. He didn't awaken gently. He broke. And in the breaking, he discovered not just who God was, but who he truly was. That same call is echoing today. Not to scare you, not to shame you, but to remind you the discomfort you feel might not be a sign of something going wrong. It might be the fire that forges your calling. So if you felt misunderstood, restless, emotional, or even strangely hopeful, stay with this message. This isn't just another day. This is a spiritually charged moment of realignment. You are not being punished. You are being invited into something deeper. If you're ready to explore what this day means for your soul, your sensitivity, and your sacred timeline, watch this video all the way through. And if you already feel the shift inside you, type 777 in the comments, your Holy Spirit code that says, I agree with what heaven is doing in me today. Let's begin, because what's happening today isn't just personal, it's prophetic. And in the first section, we'll uncover why this day carries the energy of disruption, revelation, and sacred timing. The energy of this day. August 28th carries an energetic tension that cannot be ignored. The moon representing emotion and the unconscious forms intense squares with Pluto and Venus early in the day, stirring the deepest emotional layers of the soul. These aspects challenge our sense of stability, unearth buried attachments, and reveal the pain points we often suppress. Moon square Pluto pushes what has been hidden to the surface, especially fear, resentment, or powerlessness. Moon square Venus tests the balance between love and worthiness, triggering old insecurities or relational dynamics that no longer serve us. This is not a time for bypassing discomfort. It is a moment of emotional exposure where the heart is pressed by truth and the spirit is called to release what can no longer stay. But as the day progresses, the sky opens. A rare sextile between Uranus and Neptune exact today emerges like a clearing after a storm. Uranus, the disruptor, brings spiritual innovation and divine interruption. Neptune, the dreamer, opens portals of vision, compassion, and higher alignment. When these two connect, especially in supportive harmony, they invite the soul into awakening, not just through insight, but through disruption. This isn't chaos for its own sake. It's sacred disturbance. Heaven interrupts comfort zones to realign us with divine assignment. The soul is not being shaken to collapse but to awaken. These astrological forces speak directly to the chosen ones, those with spiritual sensitivity who are called to lead, serve, or create in alignment with divine timing. This same pattern is mirrored in Scripture. In Ezekiel 37, the prophet stands in a valley of dry bones. What he sees is death. What God sees is potential. But before the bones rise, they rattle. Before there is order, there is noise. This is what August 28 embodies, the moment before resurrection, when everything trembles, but nothing yet makes sense. Ezekiel is told to speak life into what looks lifeless. That is the spiritual tension of this day. The discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is the shaking that precedes the breath. This energetic pressure is not random. It is sacred, and it prepares us to understand what patterns are unfolding beneath the surface. Let's move now into the frequency of this day and decode what these cosmic and biblical signals are really pointing to. Decode the frequency of the day. To understand why August 28 is spiritually significant, we must look closely at the rare frequency it carries, one that speaks both in the stars and through the saints. The Uranus-Neptune sextile forming today is not just another astrological event. It's a gateway. Uranus brings disruption that forces change. Neptune reveals higher purpose through dreams, vision, and divine prompting. When these two planets connect in harmony, they form a bridge between disruption and revelation. It's the kind of celestial opening that invites souls to step out of the familiar and into the sacred unknown. And because this particular alignment hasn't occurred for decades, it marks the beginning of a multi-year period of spiritual realignment, especially for those attuned to divine timing. But the message doesn't end with the stars. On this same day, the Church honors Saint Augustine, a man whose life is a living parable of this energy. Augustine was not born into holiness. He wrestled with ego, ambition, and lust. His early years were marked by wandering, searching, resisting. But when he finally surrendered to the divine voice that had been pursuing him, his entire life turned. He went on to become one of the most influential Christian thinkers in history. His story reflects the very energy of Uranus and Neptune, radical disruption followed by spiritual clarity. It is no coincidence that his feast falls on this day. Spiritually, his life models what the cosmos now proclaims: disruption is not the end. It is often the beginning of divine vision. There is also prophetic weight in the commemoration of Ezekiel in the Eastern tradition near this date. Ezekiel was not only a prophet of visions, he was a prophet of timing. He saw the exile before it happened. He stood in the midst of spiritual desolation and still received instruction to prophesy life. His vision of the dry bones was not symbolic fantasy, it was divine timing, spoken into a people who had given up hope. In the same way, August 28th invites us to stop waiting for conditions to be perfect. The word of the Lord comes in the valley, not after we've left it. Together, these frequencies, astrological, scriptural, and historical, speak with one voice. Today is not random. It is encoded. It carries the vibration of pressure that leads to purpose resistance, that gives way to vision, and divine intervention that comes not when we are ready, but when we are willing. Now that we've unpacked the frequency of the day, we can begin to recognize how these energies manifest in real time, especially in those who are spiritually sensitive. Let's explore what is happening in the hearts and bodies of the chosen ones today. What happens to the chosen ones? When days like August 28th arrive, the chosen ones feel it before they understand it. The tension in the sky doesn't just play out in headlines or global shifts. It reverberates through the body, the heart, and the spirit. For those spiritually attuned, this day may begin with emotional agitation or restlessness that feels hard to explain. There might be a sense of urgency without a clear object, as if something is trying to rise to the surface but hasn't yet found language. Some may experience physical exhaustion, difficulty focusing, or even unexpected waves of emotion that seem out of proportion to their daily circumstances. These are not random symptoms. They are spiritual indicators of realignment. Moon square Pluto brings the surfacing of old patterns, especially those related to power control or fear of vulnerability. Chosen ones might notice that situations or memories long buried begin to press forward. Meanwhile, the moon square to Venus can stir relational discomfort, revealing where we've outgrown old dynamics or where our sense of worth has been tied too tightly to others' approval. Together, these aspects pull at the very places where we resist transformation because they expose what is no longer aligned with who we are becoming. But this pressure is not the end of the story, it is the setup for breakthrough. As the Uranus-Neptune sextile becomes active, those same chosen ones who felt emotionally heavy in the morning may begin to experience flashes of clarity or peace later in the day. A sentence from a book may hit deeper than expected. A passing thought may feel like a divine download. A dream from the night before may suddenly make sense. These are the ways heaven speaks in real time. The spiritual body begins to receive what the emotional body was clearing space for. Scripturally, this movement mirrors Augustine's own transformation. His heart was restless, his desires chaotic, but it was through the pain of his own misalignment that he finally turned to God. He once wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." That restlessness is not a flaw, it is a signal. On August 28th, the restlessness in the chosen ones is not meant to frustrate, it's meant to direct. Just like Ezekiel before him, Augustine became a vessel for divine timing, not because he mastered emotion, but because he yielded to the voice behind it. So if today you feel stretched, conflicted, or emotionally raw, take heart. You are not breaking down. You are being made ready. The discomfort you feel may be the exact signal that your spirit is aligning with your calling. And that calling becomes even clearer when we remember what this day is designed to awaken within us. Let's now turn to the reason why August 28 reminds you powerfully of who you really are, why this day reminds you of your calling. August 28 is not just about emotional pressure or energetic shifts, it is about identity. Beneath every disruption and every uncomfortable realization lies a sacred reminder you were chosen for a purpose. And that purpose becomes clearest not when everything is calm, but when everything is being reordered. This is why today feels personal. Because it is. Saint Augustine's life is a living blueprint for what many of the chosen ones experience. For years, he lived divided, searching for truth in philosophy, pleasure, and human recognition. He was brilliant, but lost, passionate, but misaligned. And yet the restlessness that haunted him was not punishment. It was a divine echo, God calling him home. When he finally surrendered, not only did he find peace, but his voice became a vessel of truth for generations. That is the pattern. What feels like internal conflict is often the final stage before alignment. For the chosen ones this day surfaces all the ways we've delayed obedience, all the gifts we've buried, all the callings we've tried to dilute or hide. Like Ezekiel, standing in the valley of dry bones, the command comes, prophesy to these bones. God didn't wait until Ezekiel felt ready. He called him to speak while the bones were still lifeless. The calling doesn't wait for perfection, it activates in faith. Today's alignment between Uranus and Neptune mirrors this exact spiritual truth. Uranus disrupts patterns. Neptune unveils the divine dream. Together they break illusions and reveal calling. If something in your life is being interrupted, if a plan is falling apart, or a path is closing, it may not be rejection. It may be redirection. This is the hour heaven nudges the chosen ones to remember you weren't called to survive the old system. You were called to build something new. And here's where it becomes deeply personal. You didn't choose this timing. This timing chose you. That job loss, that difficult relationship, that silence in prayer, it may all be the shaking before the breath. Like Augustine, you may not have understood the restlessness, but today it becomes clear. The divine has been pursuing you, not to shame you, but to activate you. And with every spiritual activation comes resistance. That's what we'll explore next, the shadow side of today, and how to discern it without falling into its traps. The shadow side. Every sacred day carries its own form of resistance. For August 28th, the shadow doesn't come in the form of obvious sin or distraction. It comes more subtly through the temptation to retreat, to stay busy instead of reflective, to cling to what's familiar even if it's no longer life-giving. This is where many stumble, not because they're unwilling to change, but because they fear what change might cost them. Astrologically, the moon square to Pluto opens the door to inner defensiveness. When discomfort rises, the natural response is to control it, suppress it, or shift blame outward. But this only deepens the inner divide. Moon square Venus adds a layer of relational distortion, making us question whether we are loved, whether we belong, or whether speaking our truth will push others away. The danger here is subtle. We begin to question our worth at the very moment heaven is trying to confirm it. This is the spiritual trap, confusing pressure with rejection and assuming that discomfort means disqualification. But in Scripture, this pattern shows up time and again. The Israelites standing at the edge of the Promised Land chose fear over obedience. Though they had been delivered from Egypt, they idolized what was familiar. The unknown felt too risky. Numbers 14 tells us they wept through the night, imagining that returning to slavery might be safer than trusting God into new territory. That's what fear does. It distorts what is true. For the chosen ones, today's shadow is not external. It is internal. It is the quiet voice that says, maybe I'm not ready. Maybe I should wait. Maybe this pressure means I'm off track. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The pressure is proof that you are being called deeper. The discomfort is the friction of transition, not the sign of failure. Augustine could have silenced his convictions. He could have clung to comfort. But he didn't. He allowed his restlessness to guide him home. Today, the call is the same. Don't misinterpret the shaking. Don't confuse emotional turbulence with spiritual rejection. Instead, recognize it as sacred preparation. Because just beyond the shadow is the moment of activation, the part where everything begins to align. And that's exactly where we go next. Let's talk now about what you can do today, not to force change, but to welcome the shift. Heaven has already set in motion, the activation. Spiritual turning points don't require dramatic actions, they require willing hearts. On a day like August 28th, the invitation isn't to push harder or figure everything out. It's to pause and respond with sincerity, with attention, with faith. Heaven doesn't need your performance today. It needs your presence. After the emotional intensity stirred up by the moon squares to Pluto and Venus, many chosen ones may feel raw, exposed, or disoriented. That isn't weakness. It's the clearing, a spiritual detox before the revelation. And as Uranus and Neptune form their rare sextile, the spiritual atmosphere opens. This is not a window to do more. It's a sacred moment to receive what heaven has been preparing you for. But reception requires alignment. That's where today's activation begins. Begin with stillness. Create a quiet moment, whether 5 minutes or 50, where you stop reaching outward and listen inward. The Spirit doesn't speak in chaos. It waits for attention. Some may feel led to light a candle, pray in their own words, or sit with open hands. The form doesn't matter. What matters is that your posture says, "Speak, Lord, I'm listening." This is also a powerful day for spiritual journaling. Not just venting, but discerning. What patterns did today expose? What attachments rose up under pressure? What insight pierced through confusion? Write it down. This act of reflection is not just emotional, it's prophetic. You're acknowledging the shift, naming what's being released, and making space for what's being born. Romans 12:2 says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That renewal isn't passive, it's intentional. It happens when you choose to see your discomfort not as failure, but as divine realignment. When you interpret interruption as instruction. When you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" You may also feel a pull towards symbolic action, walking alone in nature, taking off your shoes, or speaking a declaration out loud, like "I no longer serve the old version of me." These are not superstitions. They're agreements. They mark the moment when you stop resisting the call and start walking in it. Today's energy doesn't demand speed. It asks for sincerity. Uranus disrupts. Neptune reveals. Together, they form a gate. And gates are not places to rush through. They are thresholds to cross with reverence. Which brings us now to the final and most sacred part of this journey, the place where pressure becomes peace and the storm gives way to stillness. Let's step now into the closing threshold of this day. Closing threshold. There comes a moment after the shaking and the stirring where everything grows quiet, not because the process is over, but because something deeper has settled. August 28th is that kind of day. A sacred threshold. The storm didn't destroy you, it revealed you. And now you're standing in the stillness between what was and what will be. This threshold is not a final destination. It is a pause in divine time, a place to breathe, to notice, to honor what's changed within. Like Ezekiel, who stood in the valley before the bones fully rose, or Augustine, whose conversion began with one internal surrender long before the world saw his greatness, today holds that same energy. Something is awakening in you. Not loudly, but surely. The emotions you felt, the visions that flickered, the clarity that pierced through, that wasn't random. That was heaven moving. And even if your outer world hasn't caught up yet, your spirit has already stepped through a gate. This is the moment where identity shifts. You are no longer just waiting. You are becoming. Let this day mark something. Let it be the line in the sand between old fears and new faith, between survival and surrender, between knowing the path and walking it. So rest here for a moment. Don't rush. The shift has happened. Let it settle in your bones. Thank you for spending this time here today. Not just watching, but listening deeply to what your spirit already knew. We don't always get to choose the timing of these moments. Sometimes they find us in the middle of distraction, disappointment, or transition. But even in that, God is present. And if today stirred something in you, a question, a clarity, even a discomfort, honor it. You don't have to rush to fix or understand everything. Just acknowledge that something real has shifted inside. And that's enough for now. The chosen ones are not defined by what they've mastered. They're defined by what they've surrendered to. You are not alone in this process. There's a whole journey ahead, and heaven walks with you through each step of it, not with pressure, but with presence. If today's message helped you feel seen or reminded you of something important within yourself, consider sharing it with someone else who might be in their own moment of realignment. Subscribe if you'd like to walk this path with others who are listening too. And if something spoke to you directly, I invite you to leave a comment below, even a simple phrase like, "I received the shift," to mark the moment and let your spirit speak. Take the rest of this day slowly. Let what was spoken settle. You're already becoming who you were meant to be. And that's more than enough.